number 10 spot today we have Fyodor Makhnov. Fyodor was born in June of 1878 in what would now be modern-day Belarus. As a child, he began to grow quite quickly, measuring 6'7" when he was just 14 years old. He of course needed custom-made clothes and even a custom-made bed, and it is said that his boots were so big that other children could hide in them while playing hide and seek. Because of the times he lived in as well as his exceptional height, at just 16 years old he began to perform in the circus, where it is said he grew to be 8'2". Someone of this size is going to have quite the appetite. You need a lot of fuel to keep that body going, and it is said that in an average daily breakfast he would eat 20 eggs, 8 loaves of bread, and would drink 2 liters of tea. And that's just for breakfast. Scientists would often approach him to ask if he would sign a contract for ownership of his body after he passed, but he always refused because he was afraid that if he signed the contract, he would be killed. Sadly, he would pass away at quite an early age. In 1912, he passed at just 34 years old. He left behind his wife, who was tall for a woman, but at the time still stood 3 feet and 3 inches shorter than him, as well as 4 children. Guys, before we get into number 9, don't forget to like this video, give it a thumbs up, it really helps us out. Thank you so much, I appreciate it. In our number 9 spot today, we have Bernard Coin, also referred to as Bernard the Giant. He was born in Iowa on July 27th, 1897. His true height is still disputed. Some people say he was 8'2", some say he was 8'4", and some say he was as tall as 8'8", and whichever it really was, Bernard was clearly over 8 feet tall, which, especially in the 1800s, was unbelievable. Bernard's height can be attributed to a rare syndrome called unicoidal infantile gigantism, colloquially known as daddy long leg syndrome. Apparently, Bernard's parents for a while would exhibit their son in order to earn money. They'd put him on display, but eventually they stopped because they feared it might put them in the spotlight of God's wrath. I mean, yeah, no worries, don't worry about the effect it would have on your kid, just worry about the wrath of God. As Bernard got older, of course, people wanted to recruit him for the same sort of thing. They wanted him to put himself on display in exchange for money, but he would turn down these offers because he just wanted to live a normal life. Bernard was so tall that during World War I, he was actually rejected by the army due to his tall stature. Like many of the people on this list, Bernard would pass at quite a young age. In just 1921, Bernard died at the age of 23. In our number 8 spot today, we have Zan Shichai. Zan was born in China in the 1840s, but he would later move to England and tour around, known as Chang Wu Gao. Before his move, however, he grew to be 7 feet 9 inches tall, and he was actually appointed as a member of the Emperor's court. His move to England was initially supposed to be just a short trip, but he would go on to stay for 2 years because thousands of people paid 3 shillings just to see him and his tall stature. He went on to tour throughout the rest of Europe as well, and sometimes during his show he would be displayed beside a little person in order to really dramatize just how tall he was, and in 1881 he went on to join P.T. Barnum's circus. Zahn passed away in 1893, and based on his wishes, although he was loved and had intrigued the attention of thousands, his funeral was only attended by 50 of his friends. It is said that since he was so tall, his coffin measured 8.5 feet long. In our number 7 spot today, we have Adam Rayner. So many of the people on this list started out growing quite tall at young ages, but that couldn't be further from the truth for Adam. In fact, Adam was actually below average height for the beginning of his life, so much so that he was being turned down from the army during World War I because he wasn't tall enough. Adam was born in Austria in 1899, and at his first attempt to join the army, he was only 4'6". He tried to join again the following year but was rejected, and at 19 years old, he measured only 4'8". Just a couple of years later, however, at age 21, things would drastically change and he would soon reach a height of 7'1". This fast-paced and late growth spurt caused him some troubles though, because as he grew, his spinal cord curved. Eventually, Adam went on to get surgery to try and stop his pituitary gland from creating more growth hormones, but this did not stop it entirely and merely just slowed the pace at which he grew. His health would continue to decline because of his condition, and it left him blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, and eventually his curved spine left him unable to get out of bed. Adam passed away at the age of 51 years old after reaching a height of 7'8". In our number 6 spot today, we have Agnes Macaskill. Agnes was born in Scotland in 1825, and it is said that he is quite the anomaly because he didn't have any kind of condition that caused him to grow so tall. He just was. And because of the fact that at birth he was so small, doctors weren't sure if he was going to survive. Agnes might not be the tallest man on this list, but he sure wasn't small. He measured at 7'9", but he was also just a massive person with great strength, said to weigh 500 pounds and had the ability to lift a ship's anchor. It is said that Agnes would often receive requests from people who wanted to wrestle him, which is absolutely hilarious, but that one man changed his mind after he shook hands with Agnes, and Agnes continued to shake his hand until it bled. A little dramatic for sure, but I appreciate the effect. In 1849, Agnes joined the circus and would tour many countries before going into real estate and opening a store. In 1863, Agnes passed away as a result of brain fever. In our number 5 spot today, we have Robert Wadlow. Robert was born on February 22nd, 1918, and although he was an average size at birth, by age 5 he was already 5'4". Like, that's almost my height. Imagine an actual toddler walking around the size of a grown-ass man. New definition to the terrible twos. That's just kind of horrifying. Try to put him in a timeout, but you have to like square up. By 17 years old, he was standing at 8'1", making him one of the, if not the tallest teenager ever. His huge appetite had him consuming 8,000 calories a day, but being this tall isn't all glitz and glamour, and it can come with some very serious side effects. He had trouble walking because of his fast growth, and this required him to have braces on his legs as well as use a walking stick. Unfortunately, an ill-fitted brace would eventually lead to his untimely death. In 1940, Robert received a new leg brace that didn't fit properly, and just 1 week later this brace caused a blister. Seems like a minor inconvenience, but this blister went on to become really infected. This infection very sadly went on to take Robert's life at the early age of just 22 years old. In our number 4 spot today, we have Anna Haining Bates. Anna was born in Nova Scotia in August 1846, and by the time she was 22 years old, she was already standing at a height of 7'6". At age 16, Anna went into show business because it was very clear she was taller than the average female. She began touring around, and in 1865 had a frightening moment at Barnum's Museum when it caught fire and she was too tall to escape through a window. She thought she had met her end because the stairs were on fire, but thankfully she was saved when employees broke the wall and she was lifted out with a crane. In 1871, Anna met another super tall person named Martin Van Buren Bates, who was also known as the Kentucky Giant and who was 7'8". The pair got married and were often exhibited at circuses as the tallest married couple in the world. Anna ended up passing away in 1888 at the age of 41. In our number 3 spot today, we have Joseph Edward Beaupre. Joseph is a man who was actually born in my home province of Saskatchewan in 1881, so imagine my shock when I realized that I had never even heard of him before. Joseph's parents were average height, so of course they were shocked when, by age 9, their son had already outgrown them. At the age of 17, he stood at 7'1" and is said to have been able to lift an 800-pound horse. By the time 1904 rolled around, Joseph was 8'3", and he tried to become a cowboy, but realized this probably wasn't the career for him, considering his feet touched the ground while he was riding a horse. At 21, he joined the circus, but as one can imagine, this took quite a toll on him, and it is said that he was also dealing with tuberculosis at the time, which is just crazy. Sadly, the story takes quite a dark turn as, at age 23, after a performance and after coughing up blood, Joseph went unconscious and never woke up again. The circus refused to pay his burial expenses, and his father was unfortunately too poor to afford it, which meant that his body remained with the undertakers, who began displaying it in store windows and museums. Joseph's body would remain with people who never should have had it in the first place until 1989, over 80 years after his death, when it was finally released to his surviving family members, who then cremated it. In our number 2 spot today, we have Patrick Cotter O'Brien. Patrick was born in Ireland in January of 1760, and he grew to be 8'1", which made him one of the first people to be known to grow past 8 feet tall. At 18 years old, he began working as a bricklayer because he didn't need a ladder to reach the top of the cottages like the rest of those he worked with. Like many people on this list, Patrick found himself in a life of show business where he just called himself O'Brien. O'Brien. It is said that he had to travel around in a carriage that was made specifically for him because of his size, and one day when this carriage was pulled over by a highwayman, when this guy saw Patrick, he ran the other way because he was terrified of his large stature. Sadly, Patrick's size took quite a toll on his body and eventually led to his death, which occurred on September 8th, 1806, when Patrick was 46 years old. In our number 1 spot today we have Arthur Cayley. Arthur was born in Sulby, Isle of Man in 1824, and while for the beginning of his life he was average size, in his late teens he suddenly began to grow quite tall, reaching a height of 7'11" and earning the nickname Manx Giant. Arthur was on display at many exhibits because of his height, and he traveled to places like Manchester, London, and Paris, but suddenly he disappeared. His mother explained that he had passed away and that he was already buried, but people were suspicious because it is said that just a few weeks earlier, his life was insured for $2,000. We still see it today, people committing insurance fraud, so it's not really that far-fetched of an idea, and here's what really happened. Arthur was not dead. He instead had traveled to the United States to join P.T. Barnum's circus. During his time in the circus, he was marketed as Colonel Routh Goshen, the Arabian Giant. It wasn't until his true death in 1889 that his previous life as the Manx Giant was revealed and the whole story was complete.
Starting this off at number 10, we have Brahim Takula. Now he's actually joint 10th alongside a guy called Mortiza, but I could only choose one to be at number 10, I'm afraid, so sorry Mortiza. You're still pretty tall though. Born in 1982, Brahim is from Morocco and stands at 8'1". He underwent treatment in Paris in 2006 to help treat the tumour that was causing his unstoppable growth. Now thankfully it worked and the growth hormones in his blood returned to a normal level. Despite this though, Brahim is still famous for apparently having the largest feet on the planet at 15 inches, and he actually has specially designed shoes to help support his weight. Alright, next up for our number 9 now, we have Bernard Coyne. Now he was born in 1897 in Iowa, and when he was conscripted into the US Army during World War I, he was measured at being 8'2" tall. Bernard had something called daddy long leg syndrome, which involves his body totally ignoring the release of estrogen that's telling him to stop growing. Bernard died at the age of just 23 from a glandular disorder that left him with a hardening liver. At this point, some reports even put his height closer to 8'4". Alright, next up at number 8 we have Don Kohler. Born in 1925, Don was of normal height until he shot up at 10 years old and eventually reached 8'2" tall. Now if any of you guys watching this remember the 1970s, you might remember Don as the tallest person in the world at that time. What's interesting about him is that he actually had a twin sister who didn't share his extraordinary height. She remained at 5'9" tall, which meant the two held a world record for the biggest difference in height between two twins at 29 inches. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Vikas Upal from India, who was born in 1986. Although he was never officially measured by Guinness World Records, there have been a number of other organisations that confirmed his height was 8'3", making him the tallest man in India. Over the years there were a number of publications that put his height all the way up to 8'10", which would have put him at the number 2 spot on this list, but most people think that's a bit of an exaggeration. He had huge proportions. His hands were actually said to be 13 inches long and his feet 19 inches, but he did appear to be totally in proportion. Sadly though, Vikas died in 2007 after a failed brain tumour operation. Okay, for our number 6 now guys, we have Sultan Kösen. Born in 1982 in Turkey, Sultan is currently the tallest man in the world, standing at 8'3". Here's a picture of him with the shortest man in the world at that time. Look at the difference. Like others on this list, he actually had a normal childhood until the age of 10, at which point he rocketed over 6 foot tall. His growth was caused by a tumour in his brain and it showed no signs of stopping into adulthood. In 2010, doctors attempted to remove the tumour by focusing radiation at it, and amazingly, it worked. It was a success. As of 2012, Sultan has officially stopped growing, but nobody seems to be taller than him yet. Alright, coming in at number 5 now, we have Edouard Beaupré. Born in 1881, Edouard is the tallest Canadian on this list and stood at 8 foot 3 inches tall. He was the oldest of 20 children, yes, 20. At age 9, he was 6 foot 1, that's the same height as me. But it wasn't just his height that made him remarkable, Edouard was also an impressive strongman. At the age of just 17, he reportedly lifted up an 800-pound horse. He also spoke French, English and 3 Native American languages. He spent the next 6 years touring with a circus before dying from a pituitary gland tumour at the age of 23. Alright, moving on to our number 4 now, we've got Väinö Myläinen. He was from Finland and was once the world's tallest living person. Interestingly, he was also the tallest soldier of all time as he was part of the Finnish Defence Forces. On multiple occasions throughout his 20s, he was measured at being 7 foot 3 inches tall, but interestingly, Väinö actually underwent a growth spurt in his late 30s and shot up over a foot to 8 foot 3 inches tall. Now if that wasn't impressive enough, he also apparently had huge hands that spanned the size of a bowling pin. What? Alright, coming in at number 3 now, we have John F. Carroll. This is an interesting one because John's case has been disputed over the years. He was born in 1932 and by age 27 he was measured at exactly 8 foot, but John had a severely disfigured spine, and without it, apparently he would have been 8 foot 7 3/4 inches. Born in Buffalo, New York, he became known as the Buffalo Giant after a growth spurt saw him grow 7 inches in just a few months. He was diagnosed with giantism, and although doctors tried to treat his spine condition, it did get worse, and John had actually shrunk 4 inches by the time he passed away at the age of 37. Okay, next up at number 2 now, we have John Rogan at 8 foot 9 inches. John was born in Tennessee in 1865 and was apparently a normal size up until the age of 13. Then he underwent a massive growth spurt that left him needing crutches to even stand up. By age 17, he couldn't walk at all. Unable to work for a living, John would stand at the train station and sell portraits of himself to curious tourists. He was said to always be friendly and easygoing. Although everybody knew he was probably the tallest man alive at that time, he wasn't officially measured until his death in 1905 and was buried under concrete to stop curious scientists from trying to study him. Alright, and finally, at number 1, we have the tallest human of all time, Robert Wadlow. Robert is the tallest confirmed living human of all time, standing at 8 foot and 11 inches, just 1 inch shy of 9 foot. His extraordinary height was caused by hypertrophy of the pituitary gland, which resulted in his body producing way too many growth hormones. Robert was born in Illinois in 1918. At the age of 5, he was already wearing clothes meant for 17-year-olds. The following year, he actually outgrew his own parents, and by the time he was 8 years old, he stood at 6 foot 2. That's actually an inch taller than I am now. Now sadly, Robert died due to an infection from a leg brace at the age of 22, and it took 12 pallbearers to carry his coffin.
Starting us off in our number 10 spot are the pyramids. Let me tell you right now, folks, that this one is just a theory with no real evidence to support it. But there are many people out there that believe one of the best pieces of evidence that we have to support the giant race is the pyramids in Egypt. Many don't believe the ancient Egyptians would have been able to build those amazing gigantic structures without the help of some sort. Some have suspected the help of aliens, and others have suspected that there was help from the ancient giant race themselves. I mean, I am a huge alien guy, so any theory that goes against my aliens hurts my soul. But nevertheless, I guess I could let the giants get some love too. But also on a more serious note, many doctors spoke out against Elon Musk when he tweeted that the pyramids were built by aliens. One doctor made it quite clear that he wasn't giving the ancient Egyptians enough credit. So maybe this giant theory is the exact same. In the end, whoever built these things, whether it be the Egyptians, which it probably is, or giants, aliens, or Bob the Builder, good freaking job, because you have stumped the human race for centuries. Coming in at our number 9 spot is an ancient cave painting found in the Sego Canyon in Utah. This piece of cave artwork is dated to be from 5000 BC, so she old. But on the right side of this piece, it is fairly safe to say that the artist drew 5 humans. On the left side, there is a large figure, and what exactly that figure is up for debate. Some believe it to be a demon rising out of the ground, some others believe it to be a terrifying creature, or maybe it is a giant. No one really knows. The humans appear to be looking up at whatever it is, but the large creature doesn't appear to have any limbs, so I'm not really sure what this painting is depicting, but whatever it is some type of gigantic being. Maybe it's a ghost of a giant. Coming in at number 8, we have Cyclops paintings. Throughout time, we have seen numerous paintings that not only depict giants, but also Cyclops. Now, what are Cyclops? Well, these guys are actually fabled and legendary creatures that were the size of giants, but only had one eye in the center of their forehead. There's been so many paintings and pieces of artwork throughout time that depict these humongous creatures that some believe there has to be some merit to it. Some depictions have the Cyclops also having a large horn that protrude out of its head, but I don't know how much more of that I can buy. If a skeleton of a large Cyclops were to be uncovered, then you would have my attention, but for now this is just a theory based off of all of these art pieces we have uncovered throughout time. Although, speaking of skeletons, coming in at number 7 we have the West Virginia skeletons. Ever hear of Moundsville, West Virginia? Well, if you haven't, you have now. Out near this town in West Virginia, archaeologists and researchers have been unearthing massive bones and skeletons since 1774. The first one occurred when a man by the name of Jack Parsons was walking along a flooded Cheat River and found a large bone protruding out of the ground. It was then that he pulled it out and believed it to be a femur bone, which is the one in your thigh and also is the hardest bone in your body, and if you break it, it hurts. But when we measured it up to a normal human femur, this bone was 7 inches longer. Now, more bones were later found, and based off the size of what Parsons and other researchers could find, they predicted that this human being that they found would have been about 8 feet tall. Other settlers found so many more giant bones that they eventually dubbed the town Giant Town. Very creative. After that, more and more giants have been found in West Virginia, and from Moundsville to Gianttown to Wheeling, all of these are fantastic pieces, and even though they aren't Cyclops or 14-foot giant bones, they are still very impressive. Coming in at our number 6 spot is because the Greeks said so. Yeah, remember those Cyclops paintings I was telling you about? Well, most of them come from the Greeks throughout time. Giants were incredibly common throughout Greek culture, mythology, and history, but the Greeks often referred to these giant creatures as Cyclops, as I stated before. One of the most famous Cyclops being Polyphemus, who battled Odysseus in Book 9 of the Odyssey. The Greeks also believed that these giant creatures helped build some magnificent structures as well, just not over in Egypt. They believed that Cyclops were responsible for building the polygonal walls and stonework that make up most of the foundations of the Italian and Greek structures. So there's 2 parts of the world that are believed to have help from giants. Interesting. Coming in at number 5 and at our halfway point we have because Homer says so. You know Homer Simpson? No, I'm just joshing you. I'm actually talking about the famous Greek epic poet who was born back in 750 BCE. Back in 400 BCE, Homer was quoted saying, "On the earth there once were giants." There you have it. Do you need any more proof? Yeah, of course you do, because I do too. This is just a quote from one piece of his work, but I will say that even he is speaking in past tense. So how much further back do we have to go to find the hard proof of these beings? If they ever did truly exist, the big 15 to 30 feet ones that we all dream of, then it must have been much before anyone we know existed. Coming in at number 4, we have the hillside footprint in South Africa. Near the town of Maphutsi, located near the border of Swaziland, is the footprint of God. This 4 feet long footprint is in the side of a hill. It is believed to be anywhere from 200 million to 3 billion years old, based on the age of the granite that it is now lying in. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would a giant stomp his foot in the side of a hill? Well, whatever or whomever left this print did leave it in the ground, but because of the age of the print, the tectonic plates were actually pushed together over time and making the footprint now on the side of the hill. There's even some small markings on the toes and heel of the print that make people believe it was in motion and scuffed the mud or ground as they were in mid-stride. It is not an overly popular tourist attraction, but people have visited it from time to time, and some even leave coins in the heel of the print. Maybe as a way to pay respects to those who came before us, or maybe it's even for good luck, who knows. But this is one piece of evidence that is actually pretty cool. Whether it is a giant print or not, an Instapic alone is worth the trip. Starting us off in our top 3, at number 3 we have Hanuman's footprints. Have you ever heard of Hanuman? Well, now you have. Hanuman was the great devotee of Lord Rama mentioned in the Ramayana. While this ancient being may be long gone, evidence of his presence here on Earth is believed to be found just about everywhere in Asia, from Thailand to Sri Lanka to Malaysia, and especially in Lapakshi, Andhra Pradesh. Although in Lapakshi, many argue if it is Hanuman's footprint or the footprint of Mother Sita, based off an Indian epic called Ramayana. While there's no real proof of any of these prints or who is held accountable, many people believe them to be absolutely real. But why are there only a few footprints all around Asia, and not just the few that I have told you about? Well, it is said that Hanuman leapt from India to Sri Lanka and to other places, leaving his solo footprints everywhere. Dang! If he can jump that far with just one leap, I don't want to imagine what track and field day was like against that guy. Coming in at our number 2 spot, we have an ancient molar. So as I have stated a few times in this video, there is no real hard evidence evidence, hard evidence, that there were ever giants on Earth. But there is hard evidence that there were humans that were bigger than us. That being said, humans are Homo sapiens, not Gigantopithecus blacki. The Gigantopithecus blacki were actually our ape-like ancestors that came before us sapiens. These might be just the largest humanoids to ever have actually existed. Well, proven to actually exist. Lucky for all of us, we don't just have proof, we have teeth. That's right, we have a molar of one of the large beings, and let me tell you that better not be a baby tooth because it is huge. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, and if you ask me, the coolest one on this list, we have a massive giant sword. Hugh Newman, the co-author of Giants on Record, America's Hidden History, Secrets in the Mounds and the Smithsonian Files, is a firm believer in the existence of the ancient giant race. He has traveled the world studying the different ancient civilizations and evidence that leads others to believe their existence. One that is rather interesting is the subspecies of Homo sapiens that existed in Siberia around 50 to 300,000 years ago. They were called the Denisovans because they were found in the Denisova cave. They were believed to have roamed far and wide all the way to North America, so that's pretty cool. But let's get back to the sword. Newman has a picture online of him next to a 15th century giant sword found in Scotland. I just want to know, who the hell was using this thing? How could you use this thing unless you were an absolute monster? I mean, I don't know if this counts as a real piece of evidence, because maybe it was just more for decoration or a ceremonial thing, but dang. I mean, you know what? 20 bucks to whoever can properly wield that thing. I'm serious.
Number 10. Amazon tools. The Amazon rainforest is home to many unique and dangerous creatures, as well as unsolved mysteries and lost civilizations. But did you know that the Amazon was actually once home to giants? At least this evidence discovered in 2012 seems to point to that being the truth. A group of Ecuadorian researchers ventured into the thick forest in order to follow ancient legends of a city of giants, and they actually found it. They found massive stone structures and even a large pyramid, the stones being so precisely cut and arranged that it could not have been just formed by the forces of nature. Within these structures, they also found massive stone tools that were too large for any normal-sized human to use, including hammers and chisels and other building tools. While some people do still chalk it up to natural formations, the team and many others stand by their belief that this city was once home to a race of giants. Number 9. Giant skeleton. In 1890 in France, a man named Georges Vacher made a skeletal discovery in a Bronze Age cemetery in Castelnau. 3 separate bone fragments were found that came from both the arm and the leg, or humerus and tibia bones for all the scientists out there. The bones seem to date back to the Neolithic era, which was around 10,000 to 4,000 BC, and they are thought to be evidence of one of the largest human beings ever. The man who discovered them used the size of the bone fragments to estimate the total size of the person, which would have been around 11.5 feet tall. In 1892, the bones were sent to a university in France to be carefully studied by a professor of pathological anatomy, him admitting that the bones represented a quote, very tall race. A few years later, giant skulls were found in another French cemetery and also sent away for even more study. Number 8. Bigfoot. The first discovery of Sasquatch or Bigfoot footprints goes all the way back to the year 1811. Since then, there have been countless reports of Bigfoot sightings and encounters, and with the invention of photo and video cameras came massive amounts of apparent real footage of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is most often described as being a giant humanoid creature around 15 feet tall who tends to hang out in the woods and ignore fabricated mating calls from Bigfoot hunters on their television shows. These sightings also span all the way across the entire world, each country and culture having their own representation and name for the mysterious creature. From the Russian Yeti to the Australian Yowie, they're apparently everywhere. So while many photos and recordings of Bigfoot have been debunked, there are many people who truly believe the Bigfoot is real, and who's to say they couldn't potentially be a long-lost race of giants who had to move into the woods as society evolved. Number 7. West Virginia giants. The giant skeletons discovered in France aren't the only reports of giant remains being found. They have also been found in American soil, specifically in West Virginia. In 1774, a man named Jack Parsons was walking along a flooded river when he saw a
bone sticking out of the ground. And like any normal person would do, he pulled it out, discovering it was a femur, but it was almost twice the size of his own. Alongside it, he found more bones and discovered a skeleton that was around 8 feet tall. In 1838, excavators found even more remains that were also much taller than the average person. In the 1850s, even more were found, though they soon went missing and were thought to have been stolen and sold. Over the years, even more remains were found in the late 1800s, one skeleton even being over 10 feet tall. The Giant Town and other places across West Virginia have even more stories of discoveries of this race of giants. Number 6. Robert Wadlow. Arguably the most famous real giant who you've probably heard of before is a man who was named Robert Wadlow. If you have read the Guinness Book of World Records or visited one of their walkthrough museums, you've probably seen his picture or stood next to his giant life-size statue. And yes, this guy was actually real and he was actually that tall. He was just brushing 9 feet tall at the time of his death in the summer of 1940. He was born in 1918 and at the time no one knew just how tall he was going to be, as he was an average sized baby weighing 8.7 pounds, which is less than I weighed when I was born, but to be fair, I was a big baby. He then quickly started to shoot up, and by the time he was 8 years old, he was almost 6 feet tall. For reference, the average 8-year-old is usually around 4 feet tall. He became a celebrity for his height, starring in the circus and doing a promotional tour for a shoe company. Unfortunately, his gigantism led to numerous medical issues and he died at the age of only 22. Number 5. Greek mythology. Now let's turn around and take a look back at some more theoretical proof of giants. Some famous giants from different cultures and legends. I know you may not think of this as real evidence, but I just love digging into these myths and depictions, and if so many different cultures across the world are writing about giants, this could be evidence that they're real, right? So let's start with the Greeks. Atlas was the name of a titan that went to war against Olympus. As we know, the Titans lost and Atlas was cursed to hold up the sky for the rest of eternity. Atlas also had a run-in with Perseus, who was a slayer of monsters. Atlas tried to scare Perseus away, and in response, Perseus took Medusa's head out of his bag and turned Atlas to stone, creating the range that is now known as the Atlas Mountains. But hey, at least he doesn't have to hold up the sky anymore. Number 4. Irish giants. Irish mythology believes that a race of giants known as the Fomorians were actually the original settlers of Ireland. Balor was the king of these one-eyed giants and was also the god of death. It was said that anyone who looked at him would die instantly. Because of this, he constantly kept his eye closed until it was absolutely necessary. A prophecy said that he would be killed by his own grandson, so he locked his daughter away to prevent her from having any children. But this didn't work, as a minor god snuck in and got comfortable with his daughter, and they loved each other very much, and she had 3 kids. But Balor was still thinking with his head, and so he threw all 3 kids into the ocean. Problem solved, right? Wrong. One of the sons survived and was raised by the god of the sea. The kid grew up, led a bunch of Irish gods into battle, and he killed Balor by ripping out his eye. Goodbye, King of Giants, you really tried your best. Number 3. The Bible. When you think of giants in the Bible, you may think of the story of Goliath, a giant who was defeated by a regular-sized shepherd named David. Goliath was a champion from the city of Gath, which is a place where a race of giants apparently originated from. His exact size is up in the air, but many people believe he was around 9'7" and wore a large amount of bronze armor. And here's how the story goes. David goes out to face Goliath, holding the fate of his people in his hands. So of course he's armed with a very menacing weapon, a slingshot. David uses his trusty slingshot to fire a rock, which hits Goliath right between his eyes, and Goliath falls down and dies immediately. Pretty good shot. David and Goliath has become an infamous story for representing the underdog, though my personal favorite story about underdogs is the movie Underdog, released in 2007. Number 2. Gog-Magog. If you know me, then you know I'm constantly looking for names to name my future children, and this one is definitely a strong contender. Gog Magog is the name of the last British giant. A Welshman wrote a book about how early Britain was inhabited by a race of giants, one of them being Magog, 12 feet tall and able to easily uproot an oak tree. One day the giants attacked Brutus, descendant of the Trojans, and all the giants were killed except for good old Goggy. Brutus took Magog to his second in command, who was apparently super into giant wrestling. The two wrestled and Magog was going pretty ham and crushed a few of the guy's ribs, but this didn't kill the guy and instead just made him super angry. Fueled by his rage, the man was able to pick up Magog, carry him up a hill, toss him off a cliff to his death, ridding the world of Britain's last giant. Rest in peace, Magog. Number 1. Hrungnir. Giants exist all over Norse mythology, but the one that is known as the biggest and baddest is called Hrungnir. One day, Odin, the leader of the Norse gods of Asgard, challenged the giant to a horse race, which turns out to be a little unfair when you take into account the fact that Odin was riding his magical six-legged horse and Hrungnir just had a normal horse. He of course lost, and Odin at least felt a little bad about it, so he invited the giant back to Asgard for a drink. Like me, he couldn't handle his alcohol and started getting a little rowdy, saying that he would kill all of the gods of Asgard except for 2 goddesses, which he would bring back with him to the realm of the giants. The Asgardians were like, hey bro, that's kinda not cool, and told Thor to come deal with this clown. So the two met for battle, Hrungnir wearing stone armor and with a massive stone as his weapon. Thor picked up his magical hammer Mjolnir and it broke through both the stone and Hrungnir's face, killing him. I'm noticing a pattern in these stories that the giant always ends up dying, and probably why they're not around today.
Starting us off at number 10, we have Kazam, otherwise known as Shaquille O'Neal. For any of you who have seen that movie, man oh man, I rewatched it recently and I do not think it holds up. But if there are Kazam fans watching, please let me know what you think down in the comments. Anyway, back to Shaq. Shaquille O'Neal was born March 6, 1972, and little did his mother know she would be giving birth to one of the most famous basketball players of all time, as well as a modern giant. Shaq clocks in at 7 feet 1 inch, which is 2.16 meters in height, and has quite the list of hilarious pictures comparing his size to other popular celebrities. One of my favorites is a picture of him with A-list comedian Kevin Hart. We all know Kevin is a shorter guy, but next to Shaq, he looks like a tiny villager. Luckily for Kevin, Shaq is just one large friendly giant unless he's on the court. Shaq no longer plays basketball, but is now a sports analyst on NBA-related TV shows, and even though nowadays he's usually seen just sitting at a desk, this man is still a giant. At number 9, we have Anna Haining Bates. Born in the Canadian province of Nova Scotia back in August of 1846, Anna was just like every other child until she started a bit of a growth spurt. A growth spurt that never ended. By age 5, she was already 4 feet 8 inches. That's 142 centimeters, and weighed over 100 pounds. That's over 45 kilograms. Finally, at age 22, she came in at 7 feet 6 inches. That's 229 centimeters and weighed 350 pounds, which is 159 kilograms. Bates went into show business around the age of 16 and would often be shown opposite to a little person to show the incredible difference in size. But being that tall has its disadvantages. In July of 1865, Anna almost burned to death during a fire at the famous P.T. Barnum Museum. The stairs were engulfed in flames and she was too tall to jump out the window. Luckily for her, she was saved by other museum employees who broke through walls to escort her out and was then assisted with a crane. That's crazy. It's hard enough sometimes getting emergency crews to the scene, let alone a crane. But hey, I'm guessing they didn't have the same kind of Toronto traffic as we do nowadays. Anna then later went on to marry another giant by the name of Martin Van Buren, aka the Kentucky Giant, who was 7 feet 3 inches tall. She later got pregnant with 2 children, but they both tragically died at birth. Anna herself later died in 1888 at the age of 41. At number 8, we're going back to the NBA with a basketball superstar, Yao Ming. This famous NBA superstar was born September 12, 1980 in Shanghai, China. Yao Ming's height is an incredible 7 feet 6 inches or 229 centimeters. This giant featherless being has a wingspan of 226 centimeters, which is basically just as tall as he is, and his feet are size 18. Those aren't shoes, those are frickin' water skis. Before coming to play for the NBA, he played for the Shanghai Sharks in the Chinese Basketball Association, and was then drafted to the NBA in 2002 to the Houston Rockets, where he there played until 2011. In February of 2017, Ming was elected as the chairman of the Chinese Basketball Association. Now, there is also a documentary titled The Year of Yao Yao filmed during his rookie year with the Rockets, as well as a book he co-wrote with NBA analyst Rick Butcher titled Yao, A Life in Two Worlds. So if you want to get to know him a little bit more, check those out. If you want to see how this giant dominated the court, I'm sure you can find tons of old Rocket games all over the internet. At number 7, staying in China but going back to the 1840s, we have Chang Yu-sing. Sing grew up to be 7 feet 9 inches tall, which is 236 centimeters, and was appointed as a member of the emperor's court. Later on in his life, he left China for England on what was only supposed to be a brief visit, but that brief visit ended up turning out to be a 2-year stay. During his stay in England, many people would stop him and pay 3 shillings just to see him. Later on, taking advantage of the extra cash, he went on tour through the rest of Europe and was shown off alongside another little person just like Anna Haining Bates. He later also joined P.T. Barnum's circus and was also known to have many female admirers. By the sounds of it though, none of them lasted because I could not find any info on whether he was actually ever married. Maybe he just liked the bachelor life too much. I get it. Anyway, Chang Yu-sing later passed away in 1893 and his funeral was only attended by 50 of his closest friends due to his own wishes. His coffin was 8 feet 5 inches long, that's 260 centimeters, and I don't want to imagine what it was like being one of those pallbearers. If I was one of them, I probably would have let him down. At number 6, we have Patrick Cotter O'Brien. Patrick was born in Kinsale, Ireland on January 19, 1760. He grew up to be 8 feet 1 inch tall, which is 244 centimeters, and he was the first of 13 known people to grow past 244 centimeters. At the age of 18, he worked as a bricklayer. Needless to say, unlike the rest of his bricklaying colleagues, he did not need a ladder to reach the top of the cottages that they were working on. After he had enough of bricklaying, just like the most of the other giants on my list, he went into show business where he later went just by the name of O'Brien. He traveled around in a specially made carriage, and apparently he was once stopped by a highwayman who, when seeing the giant O'Brien inside, immediately ran away with his tail between his legs. His massive weight took quite the toll on his body, which brought him to his death on September 8, 1806 at the age of 46. I'm sure his weight caused him many troubles and struggles, but I bet it wasn't easy for the horses pulling him in the carriage either. That being said, the more horses, the easier it is to pull a 8-foot tall giant. That's the old saying, right? Coming in at our halfway point at number 5, we have another Canadian, Joseph Edward Beaupre. Joseph was born in Willowbunch, Saskatchewan on January 9, 1881. His parents were what was considered average height, and honestly so was he until the age of 3, and he started growing like crazy. By the age of 9, he outgrew his own parents and he was 6.5 feet tall. At the age of 17, he was so big that it is reported that he lifted an 800-pound horse. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, then that means he was not only tall, this guy was yoked too. He reached his full giant potential at the age of 23 at 8 feet 3 inches. That's 251 centimeters. He had to wear giant custom-made shoes that were size 22. If Yao Ming's shoes are water skis, then these are freaking snowboards for each foot. He had dreams of becoming a cowboy, but gave up because his feet would still touch the ground while atop his bucking bronco. He later joined a circus as well as hoping to capitalize on his size, but it took its toll on him, especially because he suffered from tuberculosis. He sadly died on July 3rd at the age of 23. Now, this story gets pretty sad. After his death, the circus refused to help his father pay for the burial, so his body stayed with the undertakers, who then started displaying his corpse in store windows and museums. In 1907, his corpse was found in an old circus hangar and was then given to Montreal University, where it is mummified and stored. In 1970, Ovilla Lesperance, descendant of Joseph, requested her relative's body back, but was at first denied because the university didn't want his body stolen and put up for display again. Finally, Ovilla got her relative's body back and Joseph was cremated in September of 1989, 85 years after his death. Even though his circus employers and maybe the Montreal University people are now deceased, I still have one thing to say to you. Screw you guys. At number 4, we have Arthur Cayley. Arthur Cayley was born in Sulby, Isle of Man in 1824 and was considered a normal-sized human being until his late teens when he started growing much taller. Maybe it was an after effect of puberty. He reached 7 feet 11 inches tall, which equals to 241 centimeters. He weighed over 392 pounds, which is 178 kilograms. His size earned him the name Manx Giant, and he was known to be a bit more wide than his other giant friends as well. He was frequently seen in exhibits in Manchester, London, and Paris before suddenly and mysteriously disappearing. His mother reported that he was dead, but many doubted this because his life had been insured for £2,000 only a few weeks prior. They believe it was a case of insurance fraud, and that a tree was actually buried in his place. Sure enough, Cayley was not actually dead. He traveled also to join P.T. Barnum's circus, and he was known as Colonel Ruth Goshen, the Arabian Giant. His former life as the Manx Giant stayed a well-kept secret until his death in 1889. At number 3, we have Angus MacAskill. Angus was born on the island of Bernay in Scotland back in 1825. The Guinness World Record books recognize him as the tallest true giant to have ever lived because his height was not caused by any kind of growth abnormality. Funnily enough, he was so small at of birth that doctors didn't believe that he would survive. Now, Angus only grew to 7 feet 9 inches or 236 centimeters, which may not seem like much after a few of our friends on the list here, but trust me when I say this guy was still absolutely massive. He had the biggest chest ever, coming in at 203 centimeters or 80 inches around. He weighed in at 500 pounds. That's 227 kilograms in case you wanted to know. Oh, and by the way, he could lift a 2,800 pound ship's anchor. He was also known to carry a 100 pound weight, which is 45 kilograms, for 10 minutes using only 2 fingers. Angus often received requests from people wanting to wrestle him. If those challengers didn't have the same size as Angus, they most certainly had guts. He then of course later joined the circus and toured through Cuba and the East Indies until going to Europe and North America. After retiring from the circus, he went into real estate and opened up his own store. Sadly, in 1863, he died from brain fever. Can you imagine rolling up to a house and seeing this guy out front? The outside is perfect and beautiful, but I don't know a damn clue what it looks like on the inside. Can you let me know? At number 2, we have Bernard Coyne, aka Bernard the Giant. Original name, huh? Bernard was born in Anthon, Iowa on July 27, 1897. His actual height is cause for dispute because some report him being 8 foot 2 inches, while others say he was 8 foot 4 inches, while even more people saying that he was 8 feet 8 inches. No matter what though, he was over 8 feet, which is over 240 centimeters tall. He was so tall that he was actually rejected by the army, probably because they could see him coming from miles away and that they were too scared that his rations would need to be 3 times the size of anyone else's. Unlike most other giant people whose height is a result of abnormalities in the pituitary gland, Bernard's height was from the unicoidal infantile gigantism, a very rare syndrome. His parents would put him on display for extra money when he was younger, but later decided against it because they didn't want to be on the receiving end of the wrath of God. Good idea, jerks. Bernard preferred a quiet life and turned down countless offers to go on exhibit ever again. His shoes were a size 24, which means they're considered something, I don't know, bigger than a snowboard, and he weighed in at 300 pounds, which is 136 kilograms. He sadly passed away at the age of 23. Man, being put on display for a couple of extra bucks by your parents. Too bad child services were not around yet. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, if you ever visited Clifton Hill on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls, you'll know this guy. Robert Wadlow. Robert was born on February 22nd, 1918 at a normal size. However, he quickly started growing at the age of 5 and he was already wearing clothes intended for teenagers. At age 8, he was taller than his 5'11" father and could even carry him up the stairs. He then joined the Boy Scouts at age 13 and had to have his own uniform, tent, and sleeping bag specially made for him. In 1936, he joined the Ringling Brothers Circus as a curiosity. He had a huge appetite and ate around 8,000 calories a day. In case you're wondering, the average human eats 2,000 to 2,400 calories a day. Damn, that guy can eat. He unfortunately suffered from some leg issues and had to wear leg braces and also often use a cane, but nevertheless, he kept growing. Sadly, one day, one leg brace was fitted improperly and ended up causing him a huge blister on his ankle, which then became infected. Tragically, the infection killed him at the age of 22 on July 15th, 1940. He was last measured June 27th, 1940 at 8 feet 11 inches, which is 272 centimeters. He was a true giant, and not only was he actually missed, but so is his Niagara Falls statue at the Guinness Book of Records Museum. I remember countless trips where I actually measured myself up against him, and that was a lot of fun. Miss you, Robbie. There you have it. That has been our top 10 real giant encounters in history. What did you all think? Do you know of any other giants that I missed, or do you know of any giants, or are you a giant?
At our number 10 spot, we have Martin Van Buren Bates. Last time we spoke about Anna Haining Bates, and today we are talking about her husband, Martin. These two were an insanely tall couple. In fact, Martin was known as the Kentucky Giant. Records show that his height really jumped up around the age of 6 or 7, and by the time he was 12 years old, he stood over 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. In the end, he certainly was not done growing, as he grew to be 7'9" and he weighed 475 pounds. After Anna passed away in 1888, Martin did remarry, and his life is said to have been relatively peaceful until his passing in 1919. He passed away from nephritis. After his passing, he was buried beside Anna and their son. Martin is said to still hold the title of tallest person to ever live until at least 80 years old, which honestly is quite remarkable. In our number 9 spot today, we have Julius Cook. Julius lived from 1872 until March of 1902, and during his life he was often referred to as Constantine the Giant. Julius is one of the tallest people ever. At the age of 14 years old, he already measured 6'4". During his life, his height was advertised as being 8'6", but many people speculate that this was a bit of an an exaggeration as his skeleton measured 8'1", although no one is quite certain exactly what his height was, which we will get to in a second. Although maybe not the tallest man ever, Julius did set his own record as he had the longest femurs ever measured at 76 centimeters or 30 inches. Julius's height is attributed to gigantism with an enlarged pituitary gland, and unfortunately Julius had quite a bit of trouble walking. Like I mentioned before, Julius's height hasn't been confirmed and has only ever been estimated because of the fact that after a series of bad falls, his legs were really badly injured. This left gangrene setting in, after which his legs had to be amputated. This is why unfortunately his exact height is difficult to know for sure. Julius's skeleton is preserved at the Museum of Natural History in Mons, Belgium. In our number 8 spot today we have the Ancient Giant. Back in 1991, researchers were excavating a necropolis in Fidene, which in ancient times would have been a territory that was indirectly managed by Rome. During this excavation, experts came across a tomb that was abnormally long, and after examination they too learned that the bones were also unusual. This discovery would later go on to become the first complete ancient skeleton of a person with gigantism. Measured to be 6'8", this person would have been a giant in the 3rd century AD in Rome, where the average man stood about 5.5 feet tall. The team was able to confirm this gigantism diagnosis when they found the skull, although they were pretty certain beforehand due to the size difference seen in this set of bones compared to the average bones for the time period. Although this discovery is an incredible one, we still know very little about what life would have been like for a giant in ancient Rome. In our number 7 spot today we have Sandy Allen. For this one, firstly I have to shout out a most amazing top 10 viewer who goes by the YouTube screen name Angelisa Cephas, because they commented on part 1 of this video and gave me the info I needed to include Sandy Allen on this list today. Yeah, I'm lurking in the comments. Get nervous about it, never know what I'm gonna see there. Thank you, Angelisa. Now let's talk about Sandy Allen. Sandy lived in Shelbyville, Indiana, and her life spanned from 1955 until 2008. During her life, she was recognized by the Guinness World Records as the tallest woman in the world. She was recorded as being 7 feet 7 inches tall, and her height was a result of the fact that she had a tumor on her pituitary gland that caused it to release growth hormone uncontrollably, like somewhere between 200 to 1,000 times more than usual. In 1977, when she was 22 years old, she underwent surgery for her condition because if she hadn't, she would have just continued to grow. Throughout her life, Sandy appeared on TV, in documentaries, and even had a song written about her. Later in life, unfortunately, Sandy found herself having to use a wheelchair because her legs and back were unable to support her tall stature. While she passed away in 2008, in 2020, her friend and manager John Kleeman donated a collection of her memorabilia to Ripley's museums. In our number 6 spot today we have Väinö Millerin. Väinö was born in Helsinki, Finland in 1909, and he lived up until 1963. Because of some issues he had with his pituitary gland, he stood 7'4" when he was just 21 years old, but this was not the end of his growth spurt. Oh no, he experienced another in his late 30s, which is when he grew to be 8'4". During his life, he not only traveled Europe as a wrestler, but he also served time in the Finnish army. This is where he began to be considered the tallest soldier ever. After his time wrestling and serving the country, in 1946 he moved to where he could run a chicken farm, which is where he spent the rest of his life. Just a year before his death, as he was being measured at the doctor, his hand span was measured to be 290 millimeters or 11.4 inches, which is thought to be one of the largest known. In our number 5 spot today we've got Don Kohler. Don is a man who was born in the United States in 1925 and he lived until 1981. Don is another one of the few people who can be added to the list of humans who were able to reach over 8 feet tall, as it is recorded that Don grew to be 8'2". Don and his twin sister were born to parents who were slightly above average height. His mother was 5'10" and his father was 6'2", but Don was the only one in the family at the time who reached these record-holding heights. Don's twin sister grew to be 5'9", which means that there was a distance of 2 feet and 5 inches between the two, which is a record recognized by Guinness. Don explained that the most difficult piece of clothing to find to fit his size was socks, and thankfully later in his life a hosiery company in Pennsylvania started custom making him socks. Later in his life, Don would unfortunately suffer from kyphosis, which resulted in some severe curvature of the spine. At 55 years old, Don passed from a heart condition and, as per his wishes, he was cremated and then his ashes spread on Lake Wisconsin, where he loved to fish. In our number 4 spot today, we have Suleiman Ali Nashnush. Suleiman was a Libyan basketball player who turned actor, and in fact he is one of the tallest basketball players ever. He grew to be just shy of 8'1", although during his basketball career he was measured at 7'10". He was born in 1943, and in 1960 he successfully went through surgery that helped to slow down his growth. Throughout his life, he was able to play a small role in the Federico Fellini film Fellini Satyricon, where he played an attendant. Suleiman passed away in 1991. In our number 3 spot today, we have John Rogan. Not to be confused with the podcaster and comedian Joe Rogan, John is the second tallest man known in history. Born in 1867, John grew to be 8 foot 9.5 inches, which is second to only Robert Wadlow, who we talked about on part 1. John was born in Tennessee and was the 4th of 12 children. He grew extremely rapidly, which unfortunately led to ankylosis, which caused abnormal rigidity of the skeletal joints. By 1882, this sadly left John unable to stand or walk. John was still able to make a living despite this mobility issue, and to do this he sold portraits and postcards at the train station. Many offers came his way to perform in the circus and in sideshows, but John declined them all. It is said that John used a goat pull cart as a wheelchair, and that everywhere he went he was the center of attention, not only for his height but because he had just a big and lovely personality. There is a record stating that John's maternal grandfather was also a giant, requiring a larger saddle when riding a horse, so it is thought that perhaps there might have been some genetics at play here. John lived until 1905, in that year he passed away on September 12th. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Giant of Castleknock. A little different from most of the other people on this list, the Giant of Castleknock is the term used to refer to 3 bone fragments, a humerus, tibia, and femoral midshaft, that were discovered by a French anthropologist in 1890. He found these bones in the sediment used to cover a Bronze Age burial tumulus that some think might even date back to the Neolithic. If his measurements and estimates are correct, whoever these bones belonged to would have been the largest human to be known to have existed. This is because, based on the bone size, he has estimated that this person would have been 11'6". Of course, without the rest of the bones, this is hard to confirm for sure, and it's important to note that there hasn't been a modern review done on these bones just yet. Perhaps it's something worth pursuing, however, especially if it means we could confirm the existence of a human who was 11.5 feet tall. In our number 1 spot today, we have Andrei Rene Roussimoff. When we think about real-life giants, of course, many of our minds go to none other than Andre the Giant. Born in France in 1946, Andre later went on to become a successful wrestler and professional actor. His gigantism caused him to grow to be 7'4", and this left him often being referred to as the 8th wonder of the world. After finding quite a bit of success in his wrestling career, Andre began finding himself starring in many movies, including the 1984 classic Conan the Destroyer, where he starred opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger, or his most recognizable role of Fezzik the Giant in the 1987 film The Princess Bride. Andre met quite a sudden and unexpected death at the age of 46 after suffering from congested heart failure. After his death, the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame described him as, quote, one of the most recognizable figures in the world, both as a professional wrestler and as a pop culture icon.